has some truths. Now, I haven't quite understood why some of you think these truths are so distressing when they're so obvious. Solomon just points them out. The one truth is that life changes. It shouldn't be, some people say, oh, don't bring it up to me that life changes. Well, Ecclesiastes says life does change and seasons of life change. And the most famous text in the book of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, he says there is a season for everything, and there is a purpose for every activity under heaven. And he says, and he has made everything appropriate or beautiful in its time. And so the book of Ecclesiastes begins by pointing out to us that our life this side of eternity has a lot of changing seasons. And he points out something else that's so fundamental. He says the faithful Christian, the wise Christian, is one who is able to discern the right task in the right time, to do the right thing at the right moment. And one of my examples I put up on the screen was a man who was way too old to be doing some type of daredevil activity. That may look appropriate at one level, or one season of life, but very much inappropriate at another level. And so that's wisdom. And then the book of Ecclesiastes makes another point about living wisely. It tells us that there are many good things in life. There are a lot of wonderful things in life. You know, material things are good. Pleasure and experiences are good. He even says, a lot of things are good. He says the problem is we take good things. This is really the wisdom teaching of Ecclesiastes. The problem with human beings is they take the good gifts of God and they turn them into ultimate things. It's okay to have things, but it's not okay to make things the ultimate thing. You see how that goes? It's okay to have experiences and to have pleasure, and Solomon says he certainly did that, but we don't make that the ultimate thing. And he says this is wisdom. And if we learn to make good things and keep them in their proper place, we can enjoy them. He says, but if we take good things and make them ultimate things and chase after them, he says it'll be like chasing after the wind, and that is not wise. And I wonder how many people make a fundamental mistake right at that point. Take good things and make them ultimate things. Even Solomon says wisdom or knowledge is good, but he says that's not the ultimate thing either. He says you can't figure it all out because the purpose of this life is to trust the Lord, not to figure it all out. But tonight, here is the fundamental boiling down point. Solomon says there is one thing that doesn't change, and there is one thing that is true for every season. Now, that's what we've been looking for, right? Because we've been looking at a lot of different things. He says there's one thing that doesn't change, and there is one thing that we should do in every season. And the earlier in the season of life we do this, the better off we are. The purpose of tonight's message is simply this: to understand that fearing God and keeping His commands is the essence of a wise life. This is going to be the wise teacher's conclusion on the matter. And second of all, to understand that fearing God and keeping His commands is not an event appropriate for one season, but is an appropriate for every season. And you know what? As we meet here tonight, the youth group meets upstairs, and the children's ministry meets down in the basement. You know, and what a wonderful message this is, not only for us, but to refortify our efforts to them, because one of the statements that are going to be said tonight is that Solomon says it's great to fear God and keep His commandments, but it's even better the sooner you do it. Because, you know, what's better than 10 years with the Lord? 20 years, right? Well, eternity ultimately, right? But on this side of heaven, what's better, 10 years of faithful living or 20 years? What's better than 20 years? 30 years, right? What's better than 40 years? 50 years, right? What's better than 50 years? Well, 60 years, right? How much of the time of your life is spent in service to the Lord, the more time you can give, Solomon says, the better off you will be. Isn't that so true? You know, and it's the point that he will make. So the simple message tonight is fear God and keep His commands. This is the essence of wise living. Now, as he begins this text tonight, he emphasizes one truth that he's been talking about quite a bit through the book, and then he's going to talk about fearing God and keeping His commands. The first point tonight is to gain wisdom. Solomon says we must enjoy the goodness of life. And I'm going to give you the verse for that, Ecclesiastes verse 7 and verse 8. He really talks about the good times and the bad times in these two verses, but he tells us enjoy the time that is good. He says, light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. For if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in all of them, and let him remember the days of darkness, since they will be many. All that comes is, I don't like the translation futile, more the translation of transient. It moves along. And so he begins to point out, before he gets into into the discussion of fearing God, Solomon basically says, in your time on this side of heaven, enjoy that which is good. Now, that's such a simple statement, isn't it? But some of you maybe are better than this than other people. Now, Joan back here, I'm sorry to point out you, Joan, but Joan is always happy. If I could just get a minute with Joan. I mean, I don't know, Bill, I don't want to talk to you about it. Do not break my idealistic image of Joan, okay? I don't want to hear it. I'm going to hold right where I've got. You know what I'm saying? But Joan, well, every time, I've never run up on Joan. Joan's having a bad day. She just laughs. She's happy, no matter what. I mean, just having a good time, living life. It's wonderful. And, there's a lot of wisdom, as Solomon says, into enjoying that which is good. Because maybe it's just my personality, Eeyore personality, or some other people, but, it's easy to see what's bad, right? It's easier to see what's wrong. It's easier to see what's not done correctly or what could be better, right? I mean, this is some of us are built this way. I mean, I have a complex, on this. But nevertheless, Solomon says, look, if you're going to live a wise life, you ought to, first of all, be able to enjoy that which is good. The truth is, that may not sound like a lot of wisdom to just enjoy that which is good, but how better would your day be? How better would your life be? How better would my life be if I said, God, what is it good that you are bringing to me today? I mean, the Bible says every good gift and every perfect gift comes down from the Father, right? And so since God loves us every day, even this day, He's given us something that is good. He's giving us something in which we can rejoice. He's given us something that we can embrace, right? And so what is it? Solomon says if He's given us something good today, why don't we say, thank you, God, for that which has been given that is good. You are a good God, and I thank you for the good thing that you have done. The old hymn says, count your blessings, name them one by one. Well, the truth is, it's not a bad idea to do, especially when you can get spiraling down into your problems, into all the struggles. Solomon doesn't say that life is absent of struggle, for it certainly is not. But he says, why don't you embrace that which is good? That is a very good step towards wisdom. He says, but if we're going to keep on the path of wisdom, he says we must encourage this next truth. Remember, we're going to look at the seasons of life and fearing God, but the first point that Solomon is going to make is to gain wisdom, we must fear God early in life. He says this is wise to fear God early in life. Verse 9 says, rejoice, young man, while you are young, and let your heart be glad in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all of these things, God will bring you to judgment. Well, if you just go live the way you want to live as a young person. He says, remove sorrow from your heart and put away pain from your flesh, because youth and the prime of life are fleeting. And he summarizes his truth. So remember your Creator in the days of your youth. The simple point that Solomon is making here is that you are to fear God as a young person. And I don't know of anything else that really grabs my heart, but some real hard realities that the church has to face up to. And that is that I was a youth pastor for 8 years. That was a long time, at least for me. Almost made it a decade and then kicked the bucket. But for 8 years. But I just knew the statistics that when the kids in the youth group where I was at would leave the church, they would not return until they were married with children, and if then, maybe. And you know, Solomon is shouting to us that the only thing than fearing God as an old person is fearing God as a young person. It was always, I remember listening to some preachers saying, really pushing this on me. It was almost like God told me, he says, Rusty, if you give me your youth, I'll give you my truth. I remember it was just as clear as day. He says, you give me your youth, I'll give you my truth. You want to give me your time, you give it to me, and I'll give you something back in return. And I can stand here tonight and say that, I gave God, I'm still a young guy, but I gave him all my 20s. And I gave him a huge part of my teenage years, and I don't regret any of that. And so I think that, what can we do? You say, well, I'm not young anymore, and that's gone. Well, what I think we can do is, if nothing else, encourage Matt. Encourage the children's ministry workers, right? And say, boy, your job is so important, because the only thing better than an old person fearing God's young one, because they're going to have more life and more experience and more days to walk with the Lord and more days to see his work. There's more days to, and there are some things that can be done in old age that cannot be done in youth. But there are some things that can be done in youth that can't be done in old age. Right? Every season has something. I feel like I'm 31, but I don't think I could have done. I sometimes think about it. I didn't even know how much of a big of a deal this was, and quite frankly, until Jim pointed it out to me, because I would wake up. My first class at Southeastern, I was 20. I'm 20. I'm 23 years old when I started attending Southeastern Seminary, and I was staying here, working here, but I would make a whirlwind trip. And so every morning at about, my first class in Wake Forest, North Carolina was 7:30 a.m. My last class was 9:30 p.m. with just a little bit of break. So I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get in my little car. I had a Hyundai Accent 5 in the floor. That thing would get about 60 miles an hour, and it'd kind of go like that. Was like we were maxing that baby out. I mean, it didn't have any more gas in it. And I remember, and I'm driving down, I go from here to Phoenix, to Charlotte Courthouse, Drakes Branch, to Clarksville, Oxford, Wake Forest, that trek, which is all backwoods. And I remember being in that little Hyundai Accent, and I mean, it is early in the morning. It wasn't too bad in the spring, but wintertime, it's cold, and it's dark, and all those roads, they just had to be, there's this one place, and I can't, it's right before you get, some of you live in Phoenix. If you're going towards Phoenix, and you're just up the road a little bit from hitting the stop sign in Phoenix, and there's this, you kind of go up this winding hill and turn, and the trees get real close on you. I don't know if anybody knows where I'm talking about. Oh, okay, thank you, Gwen. All right. I mean, I was coming back one night from Southeastern Seminary, and honestly, I think it was about a 50-point buck standing there. I mean, it was the biggest deer, standing right there in the turn. And I thought, I am in this little teeny Hyundai Accent that I could almost, take the Hyundai Accent and just kick it and, almost flip it over backwards. And I thought, if this big deer decides it's time to jump, good thing I'm going to seminary because I'm going to meet Jesus here in a hurry. I mean, that thing was a monster. I've never seen a deer like that in my entire life. And I think, and then, so when I graduated, Jim came to the graduation, and he said, good day, Russ, it's a long trip. He did it one time. That's what I did every week on top of everything else. And I think, what if I decided to do what God called me to do at 50? Could I have done that? Maybe, but probably not. Probably not. Probably time would have been up. I'd had other responsibilities. God could have provided another way, right? But that was the way that he had provided for the moment. And so, one of the things does anybody know what this is? The Rush? This is the name of our youth group. See, LBC Student Ministry is painted on the wall upstairs. So if you haven't taken a tour of the youth ministry, that'd be a good idea to do. Just to let, especially that's painted on one of our cinder block walls. Matt got cans of yellow spray paint and almost choked us out when he did it. But nevertheless, that's another story. But this is the symbol of the LBC Student Ministry. And so, you know what? I think it's our responsibility to pray for our teenagers and to pray for the smaller kids, because, you know what, prior to me doing that at 16, it was because there was a youth group that cared for me, and prior to that was a children's ministry that brought me up. Right? I was brought up in the faith, not to mention mom and dad, who did a good job as well, but there was a lot of people helping me get it right. And they set a trajectory so that I had an opportunity to make a real decision. I didn't have to fight against the environment I was in, right? The environments called me to a decision, one that I had to make, but one in which I was set up to have to make the decision. You know what I'm saying? And so I just think tonight as Solomon says, wisdom is fearing God as a young person. He said, here we ought to think about how can we, by God's grace, support young folks, and don't think about just teenagers. Think about young people. Think about young marrieds or young singles. You know what a better mission field than that crowd. Why can't we say, why can't you get back into church? You know what I'm saying? Do whatever we need to do to help them get back into church. It is so tragic to me, I say, you telling me you're going to go off to college, you're going to leave your faith in essence, and you're going to do two things. You know what you usually do in college? You pick a vocation and you pick a spouse. That is a really great time to be living crazy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's a terrible time to be living crazy. That'd be a really good time to say, God, help me see what I don't see, right? Two things. And so I think, anyway, it's something to think about. The third point tonight is Solomon says, not only should we fear God as a young person, Solomon looks really at the end of life, and he says, to gain wisdom, we must trust God as an older person. And by the way, Solomon probably is an older person. And I'll never forget in an interview with Billy Graham. Billy Graham said, I spent my whole life telling people how to die. He said, I forgot to tell them one huge thing. He said, I didn't tell them how to get old. I remember that was such a telling interview. He said, I didn't expect this. He said, I didn't expect to be crawling around the cabin up here at 90. You know what I'm saying? And yet Solomon evidently Solomon was really almost ready to kick the bucket here when he wrote this, because he is in poetic form talking about his physical body falling apart, and Solomon knows he's going to die. He's coming to terms with it, and he talks about this. He says, serve God while you can, because he says, before the days of adversity come and the years approach, when you will say, I have no delight in them, before the sun and the light are darkened, and the moon and the stars and the clouds return after the rain. And he has this very poetic section. I may not read it all. On the day when the guardians of the house tremble and the strong men stoop and the women who grind cease, etc., etc. I'm not going to read this entire poetic section, but basically he says, and there in the latter part of verse 5, he says, for man is headed towards his eternal home, and mourners will walk around in the street. And then verse 7 says, and the dust returns to the earth as it once was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. And then he says once again, absolute transienceness, absolute changing, says the teacher, everything is changing. And so the truth of the matter is, not only does Solomon say it's wisdom to remember your Creator in your youth, he says there is another set of challenges to trust God as you get older. I know I've recommended the book Nearing Home before here, which Billy Graham wrote. But Billy Graham talks about as he got older, he had to move from preaching his great crusades to having to figure out what it was that God called him to do in every season. I think, by the way, Billy Graham is trying to do something in November. Tick Lawson gave me some information on that. He's going to try to do kind of one final, through television, he's going to try to do an evangelistic where you invite your neighbors to your house and he preaches a sermon, probably from his cabin, probably pre-recorded. You know what I'm saying? But he talks about, he talks about the unique challenges of trusting God as an older person. And I think about Billy Graham because guess who died this week? Y'all know this? There he is, one of the Billy Graham's key soloists. You know, all these great evangelists always had their soloists. So George Beverly Shea was that guy, and he lived to be 100 and something, was in as good a shape as Billy was, or better, until he died. You know, he was running around, I think on his 100th birthday, he stood up and sang some hymn just like he used to sing it, So God gave George Beverly Shea a long life and gave them all really a long life. And the truth is, every season of life has unique challenges, but the challenges have to be stemmed to trust God with each and every step of the way. And the fourth and final point tonight, as Solomon wraps up the book, to gain wisdom, we must realize that wisdom comes from fearing God and keeping His commands. Now look at the book of Ecclesiastes as it concludes tonight. Verse 9. It says, in addition to the teacher being a wise man, he constantly taught the people knowledge. He weighed, explored, and arranged many proverbs. The teacher sought to find delightful saying and to accurately write words of truth. The sayings of the wise are like goads, and those from masters of collections are like firmly embedded nails. The sayings are given by one shepherd. Verse 12 says, but beyond these, my son, be warned. There is no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the body. And amen to that. When all has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is, fear God and keep His commands, because this is for all humanity. For God will bring every act of judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. And before I talk about fearing God, keeping His commands one final time, one of my professor's favorite verse was verse 12. And I didn't understand that verse, but Solomon says, until I gave it a whirl here, he says, there is no end to the making of many books, and much study wears the body. When do you know when your book is complete? A book where you've researched. When you decide you want to stop, that's when it's done. You know what I'm saying? Because if you try to research a topic, right, and you start researching it, and like Solomon did, and you can say, I think I'm going to finish up chapter 5. You go, wait a minute, I could put one more thing in verse, on page 12, and then you get that into page 12, and you rewrite the chapter. You go, well, wait a minute, I could put something, and he says, to the making of books there is no end. Solomon knew that, because, he's out collecting proverbs, right? And he's like, well, I've got all these wonderful proverbs. Well, wait a minute, I could get another proverb over here. And at some point in time, you just got to say, I'm done. Wrap it up, send it to the publisher, publish the thing, because to the making of books there is no end. And believe you me, after writing one long book in my life, to the making of books, I said to just say, when I get to December, I'm stopping. I don't care what happens. And they can like it or lump it. I'm sick and tired of making books. And so he's right. There it is. And yet he ends all of this wisdom literature by saying his final command is this: fear God and keep His commands. And the question I ask you tonight, that's so simple, isn't it? But the question is, do you really fear God, and are you really keeping His commands for this season of your life? Every season has its unique opportunities and challenges. And the one thing that is true through all the changing of seasons is, what does fearing God mean? You know what? And these are, by the way, I conclude on this, these aren't two separate commands. They're really, one command is contingent upon another. You know the reason that we don't keep God's commands is because we don't first do what? Fear Him. I mean, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. You know, it's somewhat sadly lost on our generation. Some people say, well, fear in this context doesn't mean trembling. Oh, really? Why not? Reverential awe, that's fine. But may I say, if all of a sudden we saw God for who He is tonight, what do you think we'd do? Probably fall on our face, right? That's what usually happened. Woe is me, for I am undone. I'm a man of unclean lips, right? That's probably what we do. We saw God just like that. And He really revealed Himself to us. We'd be like, take off your shoes for you stand on holy ground, right? That's what we'd be doing. And Solomon says, if you can really see God for who He is, when He says, I would like you to do thus and such, we're motivated. All right, God, if you're saying it, because I see you for who you are, I'm going to get on to doing it. And I'm not going to make excuses about, well, I'm young, and I got a lot of life I want to live, and I got things I want to do, and I got things I want to experience, I got places I want to see. I don't make no commitment to no church. God's like, if you saw God for who He was, you throw those away. Well, you know, God, I'm getting old now, and I can't do as much as I used to do, and I'm just... He said, if you saw me for who I was, you'd be about what I asked you to do. He says, and that type of conversation kind of leads you back to, am I really fearing the Lord? Is what God says the most important thing in my life? That is the essence, not only of the book of Ecclesiastes, but the essence of living this side of eternity wisely. And so the final truth tonight is fear and obey God in every season of your life. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, you know what? God is a holy God, and yet He's a God that's eminently approachable, not because we can come to Him on our own terms, but because He has come to us in the person of the Lord Jesus. And if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, if tonight you want to say, God, I admit that I'm a sinner. God, I want to trust in Jesus as my Savior. I'll be here. I'll talk to you afterward. You can trust in the Lord Jesus. But if you are a Christian tonight, is your life, when someone looks at your life, do they say, that's a wise person because, well, they fear God, keep His commands, and it's obvious. And if it's not, just say, God, help me to be a wise person. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank You tonight that in such a book with so many truths, a book that tells us so much about, in many ways, the practical things of life, that God, we end on this note, to fear You and to keep Your commands. And God, we just pray that we would be so faithful in this area. God, that if we're not keeping Your commands, then we would just simply ask ourselves, who are we fearing? And who is leading our lives? And why are we not about doing and being what You want us to be? And so, God, may we get a glimpse of Your holiness. God, may we see You for who You are. God, as we do, God, may we be truly in awe of who You are. God, may we be about doing what You want us to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let's stand together.
Glory
is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder. There's nothing has the power to save. Your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder. There's nothing has the power to save. Your name is a shelter like a tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder. There's nothing has the power to save. There's nothing has the power to save. There's nothing has the power to save but your name. Three. It's a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder. There's nothing has the power to save. Your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder. There's nothing has the power to save. There's nothing has the power to save. Nothing has the power to save but your name.